about myself, I'm a Denver native. I've lived in this area for about 35 years. I'm in my current house for about 30 years over off of Logan. My dad and brother were both U.S. Navy veterans. My dad was a retired Denver police officer. Although I spent a lot of my childhood in Wheat Ridge, I am basically a Denverite. I worked for about 20 years for one of the big law firms downtown. I left there and went, took a 6-month contract down in Antarctica. And I worked for some of the defense contractors. And I've spent the last 6 years in Washington, D.C., with the bulk of my time being spent on a project called the 9/11. It was a 9/11 mandate for the Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative, which was rolling out IT to the land, border, ports of entry, requiring people to show ID when they come into the country. So, fracking in 5 minutes or less. Next slide, please. These are just some of the questions that I thought we need to always make sure that we talk about or ask ourselves when people start talking about fracking. Basically, what is the history of fracking in Colorado? Where does fracking support stand today? Because I know that that's kind of a controversial thing right now. Some of the politicians are pushing for it and some are pushing very hard against it. Does the oil and gas industry continue to engage the governments as opposed to talking to the people where they're trying to do the drilling? And and then someone had Tim Lopez had sent a PowerPoint presentation of an international organization called the Global Anti-Fracking Movement, and in that I've also borrowed another graphic from that to put in here. They talk about who wins and who loses from gas development. So those are just some of the questions that I thought we need to ask ourselves when we're talking about fracking and when the discussion comes up. This is the graphic that I did indeed borrow from the thing that he'd sent out. The main 4 categories as to the global anti-fracking movement are the people that are seeking to get better deals out of the developers, the people that are advocating studying it more, and the people that are just demanding a complete ban, and those that are just trying to control it by doing stronger regulations. Just a quick rundown of the differences in the fracking methods. Of course, the shale being a lot lower than the coal fracking. In coal, they take the water out. In shale, they push the water in. And so both of them have waste that they have to deal with afterwards. The biggest complaint a lot of people have about the coal is that it's so close to the water table that it affects the water table more. The biggest deal, my personal biggest deal is with the shale is that pumping that much fluid into the ground in Colorado has not, my experience, has not been a good thing. I remember back in the 60s we had a series of earthquakes from other people pumping chemicals into the ground, and once the government finally had to step in and say this has got to stop, then the earthquake stopped. And you know, a lot of people got a lot of damage from that. And I am just not a big proponent of pumping things into the ground to get things out. I think we should be able to get it out a different way. Next slide, please. These are just some of the events that I thought would be interested, or just kind of refresh people's memory about what's been going on. In 2011, the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission passes a rule that companies have to disclose what they're actually using for their fracking fluids. In 2012, Hickenlooper signed the executive order creating a task force to determine whether or not state or local cities and counties have control over their fracking, or whether this, they can just set it. And then Colorado, and then in 2013, the commission approved the 500-foot drilling setback. A lot of the environmentalists were pushing for 1,000. They got 500. The fracking fluid, what do I have on there?
Gushed.
Oh,
oil in it.
the leak
Yeah.
that happened in Windsor, Colorado for 30 hours before they were able to shut it off. And then Fort Collins banning hydraulic fracking in March, and then Paona recently mobilizing to try to protect the Gunnison River in April of this year.
When was the Longmont ban passed? Do you know?
Longmont.
It was last year, November?
In the fall,
Okay.
around November.
Probably at the November ballot, probably, yeah, okay.
The governor's suing.
Yeah.
Is he only suing Longmont? He's not suing, I mean, if he's suing Longmont, why is he not suing Fort Collins?
Got to get in line.
Good question.
Next slide, please. And this is just my personal stance on it, saying that I just don't think that we should be doing a lot of fracking. I thought I would include that. Everyone gets to say what their position is on it, so that's my position on it. I do support drilling. I've worked for companies that have done a lot of drilling, and people have prospered from it. They've done it responsibly, and it's been a good thing, but I also know that people do things irresponsibly as well. And so that's just a quick rundown of it. Was that 5 minutes? Questions?
Well, there was recently a push that I guess this commission, they felt like there was a conflict of interest because people from the companies were on the commission, you know, to look at safety measures and so forth. Does anybody know if anything's happened with that, or some of those people being taken off that commission?
As far as I know, the bill that is out there just keeps getting pushed forward and pushed forward. You know, the real issue with that is that the people that have a lot of the science and the knowledge are also the people working in the industry. So, you know, I understand that, you know, having your key players in the right positions is a good thing, but also you need to have the knowledge within the commission to be able to address the issue.
So we need Democrats on
Is this the commission that regulates?
If you go to the
Yeah.
next slide, that's the last one. Here's the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission email if you want to contact them. There's mine if you need it. And then the Global Anti-Fracking Movement has several websites, Houston, Los Angeles, New York, and Washington, at controlrisk.com. They seemed a little extreme in their presentation, but I'm a little more moderate than that.
And you have copies.
And there's copies, hard copies. Yes, sir.
You seem to say that you favor the extraction of gas from the ground, but you don't favor the pumping of fluids into the structures, and that some other way should be found to get it out. Do you know of any other technology?
No, I don't. I do not have the science behind that or the knowledge behind that. Yes, sir.
Just a comment on that. There's $500 billion every year transferred to the oil producing countries. And unless we can solve doing fracking we need to work on the science of doing fracking and not eliminating fracking. Or we'll continue to transfer $500 billion every year to the oil producing countries. And that's not a sustainable nor desirable outcome. So it bothers me when we say we're against fracking. What we need to do is say we've got to find ways to make it work the best, in my opinion.
Well, I prefer the methods that do not cause earthquakes in Colorado. Yeah, I know, it hasn't been proven, but living it, having been in the earthquakes, and then having them stop after certain things were stopped, you're right, we weren't able to prove it, but it did stop.
So, I guess the question I have is all the talk that's happening right now also taking into account the economic impact to Colorado if we just do a ban on fracking? I mean, it would probably have some devastating
It would,
impact.
I think that it would be devastating, there's still a good deal of...
And the other thing that I wanted to say is, I sit on the Colorado Energy Coalition down at the chamber, the Metro Denver EDC. And so at the last meeting, there were some pretty strong comments about what's going on in the legislature, of how we're trying to jam through this legislation, we're not talking to anybody, you know, we're not like working this through. And I guess I would, you know, like to hear a little bit more about that. You know, I missed the legislators' part of it, but it disturbed me when I heard that, because I think that if we're going to keep a good reputation in the legislature, we can't have the reputation of not wanting to talk to anybody, and just jamming things through. That's,
Right.
then you start getting people's defenses up, and, you know, their concern is, you know, we understand everyone's got concerns about fracking, let's talk about it, let's figure it out, but, you know, an outright ban on fracking would be economically devastating to Colorado. And I think we can't just move in that direction and not consider those consequences. The other thing that I want to say is that I've heard a lot about fracking over the past couple of years, because it is an issue. And what I've heard is that the dangerous fluid that causes the earthquakes are when they go back in and re-inject the water, the discharge water, the water that had the gas in it, they put it back into the ground versus trying to like recycle it or something. That's what I've heard is the more dangerous part, and I think that that's an easier problem to solve. So I think we all need to better understand, as you say, you know, the real
Right.
experts are in the industry, and if we can just get together and start talking more, I think we can come up with a
Let me interject, just because I'm running the meeting, we don't have any legislators here to talk for that perspective. I understand your point. We don't have anybody from the legislative side
I'm
to
just
talk
sharing
to
what
your
I
point.
my
I know.
thoughts are.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying, you're asking for a legislative perspective on this, and unfortunately, we're shy today.
Yeah, no, I know.
Well, I'd like to talk about the industry perspective of this, on this, because I work for Anadarko Petroleum. We are the largest operator in the Weld County, Wattenberg area. We have been doing fracking in Weld County for many, many years.
Like how many?
What?
Decade?
Decades.
Many years is too many.
Okay, so decades. It is also my understanding that the U.S. federal government contributed to a lot of the technology that actually resulted in the technology of hydraulic fracturing or fracking. So the initial study and some of the technological enhancements were actually very well supported by the federal government. It is an extremely successful methodology for getting natural gas and oil out of the ground. Anadarko was drilling very small vertical wells, many hundreds, literally probably thousands in Wattenberg. Now we drill one hydraulic fracture well across an entire section, which is 640 acres. It is actually a less impactful mechanism on the surface. We have a huge well pad from which we drill out, the horizontal wells from one location. So from the surface impact standpoint, it is a tremendous advantage to do hydraulic fracturing. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of, from an industry standpoint, I've been very encouraging of Anadarko Petroleum to get out into the community, and they have been trying to, but because of the hysteria that's going on, especially in the communities north of town, they're getting, not really assaulted, that's too strong a word, but
It's a very
people
contentious.
are very contentious. People have been followed. People from my company who've gone up to speak have been followed to their cars, and sort of not really attacked, but just intimidated, harassed. So I'm a huge proponent of anything we can possibly do to try to have people have a better understanding of what's going on and what the real risks are. And I think that focusing on the risks that you're talking about, like what happens when you inject the water back into the ground, my personal opinion is that there's probably more air pollution risk right now in terms of the operations in Weld County than there is risk to the water table. So I think and although there's a huge ozone mitigation regulation up in Weld County, And so I think there's just a lot of misunderstanding that we really need to try to mitigate so that people really understand what the challenges are and what the real issues are. I don't think anybody in Colorado, I certainly know our company is not interested in polluting the water tables in Weld County. We do a tremendous amount of work with the community up there. And I think people in Weld County feel very favorable toward Anadarko Petroleum. But Anadarko Petroleum also paid out $6 billion as a part of the Macondo well fiasco. I mean, nobody in this industry pretends that there cannot be significant environmental impact, and we don't want those.
Right,
You know,
right.
certainly we didn't want to pay out $6 million or
Sure.
$1 billion.
Hugo, did you want to? Sorry.
Yeah,
Do you think it's a good idea to let the people of each county decide what they want to do with this on their county? Because I got a lot of opinions, and everybody is right. But I mean, at the end, it's their land, where they live, where they have the sheep and the cows and everything. Let them decide. Like we have decided on taxes, we have decided on a lot of things. Why we cannot decide on this aspect?
I guess,
go ahead.
I just wanted, in reference to the earthquakes, about a mile away from here until about 4 years ago lived the statistician who was a professor at DU, George Bardwell, who proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the earthquakes were being caused by Rocky Mountain Arsenal injecting toxic waste fluids into the ground up at Rocky Mountain Arsenal. And when they stopped injecting those fluids, he also proved beyond a shadow of a doubt, statistically, that the earthquakes had been caused by the Rocky Mountain Arsenal injecting those fluids into the ground at Rocky Mountain Arsenal. So, beyond a shadow of a doubt, anybody who's taken statistics would be a probability that this could be wrong, being very small, and George's results were that the probability that he would be wrong would be so small as to be not even measurable. So it has been proven that the earthquakes were caused by fluids being injected in Rocky Mountain Arsenal. It has been proven.
Thank you. I was
Yes.
very young back then, so.
But Paula, by the same token, there are not earthquakes being,
Earthquakes are not happening now, and you're doing
earthquakes
fracking.
are happening in Weld County when we are injecting massive
Right.
quantities of water back into the ground.
Right.
So where's the disconnect there?
Can I introduce some science?
Sure.
I'm a 38-year
Why not?
petroleum geologist, and the way that you run into problems with re-injecting fluid is re-injecting them along a fault line, which we know and have mapped for 100 years. So it's a simple regulation process to say you don't inject into a fault line. That creates an earthquake. We know that, and she's absolutely right. So if you inject any fluid and lubricate a fault, your chances of having an earthquake are, go up scientifically, drastically. But it's a simple regulation to say you don't allow that. You don't allow re-injection of fluid into a fault line. So scientifically, from 38 years of experience, that was a mess up that should have been taken care of either by the people on the site or the regulators who may or may not have looked at the process. My solution to this is regulation, because we need the energy.
Right.
Natural gas, John just pointed out, is critical to a bridge sense to get us to green energy. We're not there yet. No one in this room would say we are, but we want to be. So let's look at it realistically. The jobs are one factor, but more importantly is let's look at the science with the concerns of the people. If the people choose to take a legal direction on that, hey, great. But somebody is going to decide, and it's probably going to be based on the facts. So the hysteria is all fine, but earthquakes is a minor consideration from a geologic standpoint, is my point.
I'm gonna take one
One
more
more.
quick question, and then we've got to move
Past
on.
the 7 minutes, I'm sure.
Just a comment
40-minute
that
discussion.
I mean, as we know with anything, arming ourselves with facts and information gives us credibility. And I'm with you, we need the regulation. And we have two experts here. My significant other is a groundwater engineer. I think it would be great for you all to give us a quick and dirty presentation so that we can have facts when we go out to make arguments of why we do need, we need some legislation, we need some control, but I think to educate ourselves gives us the credibility, and I'd love to use some of the expertise that we have here.
That's a great idea.
Okay,
Okay,
the
the last
contact
two-
number for me is right here, if you want to share that. And there's hard copies up here if you want a copy, and it has that information on it. Anything else?
No, thank
No,
you
you're
for
set.
bringing it.
Thanks, Cherri.